Bookseller Crow.
How did you do that?
Almost live.
Oh, well, there's a secret door. For the first time, we've got microphones. I think we've got microphones. So it's got a bit of a folk club vibe to it now. It's an enormous pleasure to welcome John back to the shop. We did the launch party for his first book, Concretopia. Don't know how many years ago that was.
That was 2013, November 2013.
Was it November?
Yes.
There were more than 100 people in here, which is just testament to how well liked John is, I think. Tonight he's going to take it away himself. He's going to solo it mainly, I think. I'll let John explain what he's going to do.
So normally I do like a slideshow, and I've got a sort of control freak style presentation, and it's all planned to the nth degree. But actually, this is a bit of a one-off. I don't quite know why. It just is. I decided that I thought it might be quite nice this evening. The book has got loads of references to novels that have kind of inspired bits of the writing of the book, and people who have written about the era that I've written about in my new book, which is 1980 to today. And I thought it might be quite nice to read a little bit from my book, but then also read a bit from some of those novels that were sort of relevant and were sort of quite good juicy bits to read out. And then I'll probably read another little bit from my book, and then we can sort of have a chat about the sort of subject. And I'll sort of start off by kind of introducing the book. So I've written, so back in 2013, we had a launch for Concretopia, which told the story of the rebuilding of Britain between 1945 and 1979. And I remember thinking when I finished that book, there's absolutely no way I'm going to write a book about the subsequent period. There's no way. I can't even imagine what that story is. I don't understand it. And I think part of that was because that subsequent period is a period that I've lived through, and it's much harder to have any perspective when trying to write about a subject like this when you're sort of in it. I don't know. It's easier to kind of look with a bit of detachment, I think, and it's sort of slightly harder to sort of be in the story a bit more. But actually, as time went on, it sort of feels like we've had a succession of kind of weird full stops, and then the pandemic has been like a sort of, a huge full stop to all of our lives, and we've all got much more. I guess we've all become much more used to the area where we live and the landscape on our doorsteps and the sort of weird things that have happened in our local areas that we've maybe never really paid that much attention to. But after 2 years of local exercise walks and all of that stuff, we're all a bit like, why are there all these weird surface car parks everywhere? And why did these things get converted? Why did these offices get converted into these sort of weird flats? And who thought that was a good idea, to turn that Victorian house into some kind of like grey plague monster covered in, grey windows and grey shingle and grey, with a grey extension out back? Why has that happened? And all these sort of odd things have sort of happened in our kind of local environments that maybe we haven't really noticed. But then there are certain things that we're told very much officially to notice, which are the icons, the Shard or the Gherkin or any of these the buildings that that exist that, very much we are told are the buildings of our era. They're the important things, they're the things we should think about, they're the ones that have branded our towns and cities. They are the places that define us as people. And I suppose in this book I wanted to kind of slightly deconstruct that as an idea, because for me I feel like the icons of this era, the sort of built icons, are as much things like Barratt homes and business parks out of town as they are, these great big kind of amazing sort of shiny buildings in our city centres. And I think because they might not be architectural icons for the same reason, but I think they're icons of an era. I think the Barratt home, the 80s Barratt home, is such an incredible icon of that whole period. It tells us so much about the 80s and the aspirations of the 80s and what we were kind of given as a symbol of how we should be living. And business parks, the same, this kind of idea that we're going to sort of create these odd, slightly sci-fi campuses outside a town, and we're going to have these mysterious things going on in all of these big sheds that none of us ever really quite know what they are, and most of us don't even visit our local business park. We don't really know what goes on in them. I used to work in a business park in Brentford, and it was such a weird environment. And that used to be where the head office for Waterstones was many years ago. Now it's in Waterstones Piccadilly. It's like terribly posh, and it wasn't terribly posh then. It was in Brentford. It was next to Brentford Leisure Centre. And you used to kind of go outside, and you would just see all of the reps from all the big companies would be out in the surface car park outside, looking at this smoky glass building with its kind of fake, just a bit like a Tesco. And they would all be kind of having their last minute fag, and they would be listening to Tina Turner singing Simply the Best on their headphones, and they'd be hyping themselves up to do their presentation. You'd see them like roaring into the office to go and talk about, dummies, books or something. And it was a kind of, it was a weird environment, and you can sort of see how, that sort of reflected in programmes like The Apprentice, that kind of weird sort of slightly kind of fake, kind of hyped environment that isn't really like real life, and isn't a real life that many of us sort of exist in or believe if we do kind of encounter it. So the idea of the book really was to write about all these different sorts of icons, and I travelled around the country and I interviewed tons of people. I interviewed some big politicians like Michael Heseltine, and I interviewed lots of architects. I interviewed Mike Davies, who designed the Millennium Dome, and I interviewed Terry Farrell, who designed MI6, and the sort of various kind of of these kind of big architects I interviewed, and then other architects and planners who have worked on all sorts of places all over the country, which was interesting. I got very obsessed with all those Millennium lottery funded places that I remember we were all terribly cross about them at the time. Oh my word, they're trying to make us enjoy learning. How dare they? And all of these kind of amazing lottery funded places were being sort of put up all around the country between about 1997 and 2003. There was a huge amount of them, and it's sort of interesting now that we look back on them, and a lot of those buildings are so suffused with an optimism and a sense of excitement that now feels so alien to the world we live in. And it's this terrible kind of yearning for them now. I feel hugely emotional thinking about those buildings now, in a way that my main emotion at the time was just a slight sense of crossness. And I think partly it's because I think British people like me are rubbish at having fun. and and don't like the idea of a building sort of coming along that is presenting itself as being fun. And so I think they are kind of those buildings kind of they provoked a very British reaction, which I think only now that we've seen, obviously we spent the millennium ripping the dome to shreds, but now it's literally been ripped to shreds. Suddenly this huge outpouring of fondness for it. People are suddenly going, oh, my dome! And which seems kind of unimaginable. People were absolutely, were furious about it for ages. So, I find that amazing how these buildings can become part of our lives and part of our psyche in a way that we sort of maybe haven't realised. And so all those kind of worries and anxieties I had at the beginning, where I thought, well, I can't write about this period because I'm in it, have sort of gone, because the more I've looked at stuff, the more alien it all feels in some senses, the more bizarre the stories, the stranger the history it's revealed, but then also the sort of more connected to it I feel also. There are so many of these stories that I hope, if you do read the book, you will also kind of recognise odd environments or places or sort of styles of architecture, or stories from the people that I talk to that you will, that might resonate with you as well. So what I thought I would do is I was going to start by reading a little bit, and I'm going to read a bit that is very much what everybody would expect me to write. It's about Croydon, my hometown. Croydon was a mess, and so was I. Back when the 20th century was going to sleep, I had taken a walk with my Polaroid camera around the town's decaying concrete monoliths. Luna House, the Threepenny Bit, the Nestle building, Taberner House. Towers with no great national recognition, but local landmarks all the same. Despite its monolithic concrete posturing, I'd woken with a feeling that this post-war landscape was suddenly a fragile and fleeting thing, the tail end of a 1950s and 60s redevelopment known as New Croydon. It would surely not last long into the coming millennium. Looking back, my feelings were clearly inspired by more urgent personal events: the recent death of my mum and my dad's terminal cancer. As I trudged round in the cold December drizzle, I was inevitably projecting a sense of loss on this landscape. Not that the darkened windows of the towers and the litter blowing around the underpasses needed much help on that front. The Polaroids turned out a grey, bleak and slightly blurry record of a really bad time in my life. I was grimly delighted. So I write a bit about Croydon because I can't stop myself, and the weird thing that happened to Croydon that nobody foresaw when I was doing that miserable trudge a couple of days before the millennium. At no point did I think, what's going to happen to Croydon? Hipster tech hub. I mean, literally nobody thought that was coming. Nobody saw that. Nobody thought, I know what's going to happen. Shipping container pop-up mall. That's what's going to happen. And Croydon, it's basically this sort of crazy place that reinvents itself around the latest fad about every 30 years. It desperately goes for something. So whether it was the airport in the 30s or sort of banking and insurance in the 50s and 60s, and now kind of it's all that kind of tech stuff in the sort of in the noughties and teens. it's very interesting that it does this. But the sad thing that always happens is it goes crazy after this, and then has a huge bust, and it goes horribly wrong, and then it just sits there looking like it's been really badly told off, looking a bit sorry for itself and a bit sad for about 10 to 15 years before it starts to get ambitions. So writing about Croydon is always a delight because it is a strange place that reinvents itself all the time, and actually looking at it, and researching the book, it's been fascinating sort of seeing how it's reinvented itself in my lifetime in a way that I hadn't really noticed. It starts very quietly with the trams, and then before you know it, you've got all these towers going up around East Croydon, and something very odd is happening to Croydon, and now something very odd is happening to Croydon, but it's a very sad odd, certainly from the people that are going to have to pay for it. So yeah, as I say, I'm going to read a little bit from a few novels that inspire different bits of the book, because I think it's been very interesting looking at the kind of cultural reaction to a lot of